Hi there, AB Bio. I am going to go through another FRQ sample with you. This is the one from the 2020 practice test number 1 in the AP classroom, and it's FRQ example number 4, or question 4. So these are a little bit shorter than the last two that I've done. Up at the start of this PowerPoint, I've got the outline or kind of like what to expect from a question 1 and a question 4. So a question 1 is a lot longer, interpreting and evaluating results of an experiment. You're often like doing content, identifying things about the experiment like controls or methods or hypothesis, analyzing data, and then like predicting and doing something further. In a number 4, conceptual analysis, these are shorter questions. Again, they're roughly 4 points typically, but we're not going to know how many official points it's worth this year. So you won't see like A worth 1, B worth 1. You won't see anything like that. But this one, you've got like a describe and explain of biological concepts. So this is just content knowledge applied to the situation you're looking at. And then we've got a prediction because we've changed something, and then justify that prediction. So there's not this data and experiment analysis, but it's basically the same. This question will be timed for 15 minutes. So if you want to time yourself when you do this one, feel free to set a timer for 15 minutes. If you feel like that's a short amount of time, just know that I looked at this question blindly, and in 15 minutes I was able to like write all these notes down as I'm looking and just like reading the question carefully and going through and then reading the answers and then formatting my PowerPoint a little bit and then like writing things out. And I had plenty of time, so you will have plenty of time to do like 4 questions within the 15 minutes. I want to remind you to like be chunking when you're reading this. So on this one, whenever you see like a period or things like that, like a comma, think of that bar that I would put on your exams to like make you stop and like write a thing down. And I wrote like, oh, these Daphnia, these little, what are they, crustaceans, raised in the presence of predator chemicals, you grow a bigger head. I'm just putting that in my own words here, because what we're seeing is if they're developing in the absence or presence of the chemical cues from this predator, nota, necta, whatever, and the chemical cues are present, you can see that crest height, like how high, it's a much higher bar, and crest width, like how deep their head is as well. This is the most ridiculous little diagram of these guys. I honestly look at them like, I don't see any difference, and I don't know what this big curve is. Like, to me, that does not, so I don't know how they're measuring this. Don't worry about it, don't get hung up on it. Look at the graph, okay? You're going to be pulling or examining data from the graph, and you can read the graph, no problem. Again, they've got teeny tiny error bars. This one here is a little bit bigger, but the error bars, again, they're representing 2 standard errors of the mean. This question is a number 4, doesn't get into a whole lot of the detail about statistical analysis or claims and things like that, but it would be applicable to a number 1 style question, the longer one. So if you want to time yourself for 15 minutes, go through these 4 questions for 4 points. This is the one where it says time yourself. The underlines are no longer in red. That takes too long. And then this is where this video gets plopped. So for A, it says describe the factors that influence an individual's phenotype. If all you say is genotype, you will not get this. Notice it says factors, plural, right? This whole experiment is talking about how these environmental cues, these chemicals of a predator, are causing the crest to grow larger in the developing crustaceans. So that's an environmental thing. It may or may not turn on those genes depending upon what it detects in its environment. So you have to have environmental information and genetic, or you can say something like phenotype is based on genetic potential that is influenced by environmental conditions. Little review here that these are multifactorial traits. You may have a genetic component or a piece, but like the environment is playing a role as well. In B, explain how the presence of these N chemicals affect gene expression in the Daphnia. I got real technical and I said something like chemical signals received. We have recognition on a receptor, transduction of that signal, and the cell's response is to have more gene expression of crest growth. Normally crest growth genes are off because it is energetically costly. So I was kind of like putting things together with what I know about kind of like signals that then result in gene expression as their final effect. But they didn't even get that technical, so you don't have to go crazy with your answers. A lot of this is just like a single statement. So presence of the chemical cues, enhanced expression of genes associated with crest development in these Daphnias, or you could say turning on genes that would develop a larger crest. Any of those kinds of statements that basically makes the two connections of what you just did in A. You have genetic information, you have environmental information, like how is it that the chemical is doing it? It's like when the chemical is there, it turns the genes on, you get the larger crest. This is not a hard question. And I don't know if it's because it's now almost 1:30 in the morning. I thought I was being effective, but C is making little to no sense to me as I read it, and I think there's either a typo because D makes sense. So what I see in C, it says, as a follow-up experiment, researchers placed Daphnia that were exposed to the chemical cues into a tank without chemical cues. Okay, so these Daphnia, they reproduce as clones. So they can reproduce asexually, and that happened here. Like researchers raised Daphnia clones, right? And so they're just taking the exact same one genetically again and again and putting it in different environments and seeing what happens. So we have one with a large crest that previously was exposed to this chemical from predators, so it grew a large crest, and they put him in a tank without chemicals. I'll underline without. The Daphnia reproduced asexually, and the offspring developed in the tank without chemical cues. So, to my understanding, without chemical cues, you're going to grow a small crest. So it says predict the relative size of the crest height and width of offspring raised in the tank without chemical cues as compared to the parent Daphnia. And both this that came off of like the PDF of the test that I have and the one of the rubric on the AP Classroom, they said this really short phrase, offspring resemble the original population. And I'm going, original population like their big-headed parents they just came from? No. Are they talking about original population like the very first ones of like the normal crest size without the predator, and then they altered these from those and then altered them back? So I gotta be honest with C, the answer is really unclear, and I don't think it's specific enough. I don't know if it's 115, 130, like I said, and if I'm missing something, but D makes it very clear. So I think the rubric answer in C is just kind of like, I wish they would have picked better wording. In D it says provide reasoning to justify your prediction in C, and both things are needed here. So the reasoning that the chemical cues only affected the phenotype of the Daphnia parents during their own development, but it leaves that genotype unchanged. It's not like permanently turning on crest expression always, right? Or changing and mutating for crest expression. The reasoning that because there's no change in the heritable genetic sequence, the offspring are not expected to exhibit the larger crest height and width of the predator in the predator-free environment. So they're not getting larger crest and width, it's the same. So you have to make the connection that these chemical cues from these predator chemicals are not changing the genotype, it's just influencing it in that generation only, right? And so it's not a trait that is getting passed on hereditarily. All right, it's time for bed. So that is the end of the ones from, practice test number 1, practice game number 1. So I did number 1 and number 4. And moving on to the next one, I'm going to go into practice test number 2 tomorrow. And here's one about glycolysis and heredity again. So I think that'll be a good one. So if you are taking the AP Bio test, good luck. Keep in mind your chunking and things like that and breaking things up. do it however you think you would be successful at home, but I found it was helpful to like quickly jot down little ideas and little notes as I'm reading a prompt and then go in and type. You will get to choose to either like fully type your response or write it out, take a photo, and upload that photo. And so kind of try things out now while it's the sandbox and start deciding what you want to do. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.